Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the attic for this collection of scary stories, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in a rural area dominated by cornfields and old farmhouses. My friend Richard worked on his family dairy farm since he was a young kid, so we spent a fair amount of time following him around the farm during the summertime. His grandparents lived on the original farmhouse on the property, which was built sometime in the mid-1800s. It was a large brick house with 2 chimneys and was painted white and in fantastic shape, but definitely had an old feel about the inside of it. Richard was feeding calves one evening, so we rode our bikes to go hang out on the job. We noticed a yellow glow coming from the attic. I asked him what was up there. He looked up from the calves and squinted at the attic, saying, "I've never been up there." He pulled out his cell phone, an old Motorola Razr, and called his grandpa to tell him that he left the light on in the attic. His grandpa told him that no one had been to the attic today. Old people forget stuff all the time, so we weren't that weirded out. When Richard was done working, we went to the house and into the attic to A, turn the light off, and B, check out the attic. The door to the attic was small, maybe 3 feet, and had a deadbolt keeping it closed tight. When we walked through the door and up the narrow steps, we found ourselves in a huge space. The attic had nice wooden floors, 4 large windows, 1 on each side of the house, and was dimly lit by 3 exposed light bulbs hanging equidistant across the ceiling. The lights were off, which was weird because they were on when we walked into the house, so Richard hit the switch at the top of the steps and the bulb lit up. That's when the confusion started. The lights were bright, like fluorescent white, the white that is almost blue. It definitely wasn't the same light that we saw from the barn. We looked around and saw some old gaslight fixtures that probably hadn't been touched in decades. Gas didn't even run to the house anymore. 2 of the 4 gas lamps were warm. Turns out the attic used to be a suite back in the late 1800s. The eldest son lived there, and the plan was for him to take over the farm. You can actually see the marks on the floor where the furniture used to be. It was alleged that the son took his own life in the attic, but we couldn't find proof of that anywhere. It just goes as one of those unexplainable things. For context, I am a 28-year-old single woman. I do pretty well in my field, and had just gotten out of a bad relationship that I don't want to get into. I had enough money saved up so that I could redo my attic. I wanted it as a new bedroom. It would be far more spacious than the downstairs room I had. I had hired a bunch of guys to do it as part of a company, and they would come in all day and be fixing it. I worked from home, which is good, because I liked supervising to make sure that everything was going up to speed. They had a big plastic sheet covering the portion of the house that they had to basically destroy in order to get the work done. It wasn't a problem. My bedroom was on the lower part of the house, so I didn't really go up there anyway. The story begins about 5 days into their work. They had been diligently doing whatever it is they were doing and left for the day. I was alone, watching TV on my computer. Now, something important that I need to add is that I had been flirting with a guy over Tinder. We had been talking for a while now, and he seemed quite interested in meeting up. But something about him gave me a bad vibe, and I wasn't sure if I was being judgmental or not, as he did look really attractive. I kind of put him on the side as I was focusing on the house ordeal, and hadn't spoken to him in the last few days. When I get a message from him asking how I've been and what I've been up to. It had just started to rain. I paused what I was watching on my laptop and contemplated replying to the message. After staring at my phone for a few seconds, I realized I really couldn't be bothered at this very moment, so I put the phone back down, ignored the notification, and carried on with my show. As the evening progressed, the night was getting stronger, and the sound of rainfall has this curious effect, even when in the background with me, when it just makes me fall asleep. I started realizing that I'd missed half of my show, so decided to put it on pause, got up, closed my laptop, and made my way to the bathroom to get ready for bed. That's when I heard a curious noise from the attic, even though the heavy rain was muffling lots of sound. It sounded like movement. This was definitely curious. I hadn't heard anything from the attic before, not while there was no one in the house anyway. I just stayed silent, listening. There it was again, another kind of shuffle, sort of scraping sound, sort of like the sound you'd make if you moved your shoe across wood. I stood there in complete silence, listening at the rain, contemplating my next move. Could it be an animal that got in? Surely it's not a person. I saw all the men leave. I started to feel a bit weirded out. I got a shiver down my spine while thinking about what to do. If it was a home intruder, then they could certainly hear down any noise I made down here. If I were to call someone or the cops, they'd hear. What if they heard me and attacked before anyone could make it? 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind. I decided the best thing to do would be to try and silently make my way to my car outside. Yeah, that made sense. It's a real shame the floor of my house is so super creaky. I started making my way out, grabbing my keys from the hook silently as possible in front of the house. I gave a glance upstairs towards the attic, but couldn't really see much because of the plastic in the way and the debris that the builders had left all over the floor. I silently closed my door, ran in the rain to my car, and while I was under the protection of my vehicle, called the police. I sat there talking to the dispatch, explaining the situation, and they told me they would send a squad car over. Within minutes, someone was there, and the police officer asked me to roll down my window, which I did. The three of us were getting soaked. I told them to please go inside and just check out the house and that I was frightened. The officers opened the door and in they went. 5 minutes later, one of them comes out and says it's safe to come in again. When I do come in, they tell me that they had found someone upstairs in my attic. I am horrified by this information and get a really strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, a confirmation of dread and deep-seated fear. I ask them who it is, and they bring forward a person, and when I see them my eyes bulge. It was my Tinder match. How the hell they figured out where I lived and managed to sneak into my house is beyond me. He started to babble something about not replying to him, but before he even had another chance to speak, they dragged him into the squad car. I was asked if I wanted to report anything else, and I said thank you, and before long they had left, leaving me with this horrifying ordeal in the pit of my stomach and processing what had just happened. Needless to say, since these events I have several trust issues when it comes to meeting new people, especially with dating. You just never know who's a creeper out there or what some people are capable of. This happened in my childhood home almost 20 years ago now, when I was between the ages of 6 and 12. The house was built sometime around the 1700s and was an old farmhouse. At some point it had been divided into 3 houses, and then we bought it and knocked it back into one house, also knocking down one end, which had lost its character through the years, and built a new extension that fit the style of the house better. My bedroom was in the newly built part of the house rather than the original one. There were a few areas that I always felt uncomfortable in. The upstairs hallway at night being long and dark, one of the outhouses which had a small window into a room that we never found any other access to, but I think that was just because I was young and it was dark. But mostly, I loved the house. I even cried when we moved. As a family, we were recently reminiscing about the house and our ghost stories about the big mouth Billy Bass going off on one side of the house when we were all watching TV. It's the only weird thing that we could recall. How A, it went off in an empty room while not being on the motion sensor setting, and B, it was so loud we could hear it from the other side of the house and with the TV on. I brought up what used to happen in my room, and my mum was completely shaken because apparently I never told her, but kind of just assumed it was broken and just only happened in the middle of the night. But upon discussing it, I suppose it really doesn't make sense. The actual story is there was a door in the bedroom, a built-in wardrobe to the left, and an attic access in the ceiling in a small area, which then opened up to the rest of the room, kind of like two squares that overlapped at one corner. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the door to the attic would crash open. It was one of those ones that you pushed up and it unclicked and you could swing down and grab the ladder. So if you're not holding it after unclicking it, then it'll just swing freely down and crash into the frame. It did this most nights, effectively trapping me in the room with a massive black hole in the ceiling. It always woke me up. It seemed like the loudest sound in the world. I would hear some movement in the attic, but the house was always making strange sounds anyway. And then in the morning, I'd just close it up again and never told anyone. My mum is a very pragmatic person, but she didn't seem to believe it was just a faulty latch. I'm curious what other people think. Some of you might say it was a squatter, and the house was abandoned when we bought it, but the attic was newly built in that new section of the house, blocked off from the old attic. We replaced most of the roofing beams in the old attic because there was rot, so builders had been in there, and we also kept some things up there. There was never any evidence of squatting, even when we first got the place. The house was in a small village in the countryside, populated by 200 people. I don't think it would have been possible from the inside, and it would have been over 6 years, and you'd have to be the dumbest squatter to make that much noise every night. The ladder was independent of the door, it never came down. The door to my room needed to be opened for the ladder to come down through it. I think the faulty latch would have been the most reasonable explanation, but then why only at night? The fact it was right next to where the darn fish started singing on its own too, but there really wasn't any other activity otherwise. It just made me jolt awake in panic most nights. We moved out of there in 2004, so I can't do any further investigation, but it was scary at the time. I lived in New York with my mum, while my dad moved to North Carolina with his new wife, and the house they live in is supposedly haunted by spirits that follow my oldest stepbrother. Now lucky me, I have never actually seen those spirits with my eyes, but have felt and heard them. I visit each summer, and a situation I even wanted to talk to you all about was the one time me and my stepbrother Eli were home alone while my other stepbro called Gabriel was at school. It was midday and sunny out, when I had decided to go upstairs and play my PS Vita. But as I was walking up the stairs, I heard something from the attic that sounded like Gabriel screaming, "Eli, help me!" I froze. I had never been that scared in my life. Something kept me from even taking another step, since the screaming was coming from directly above my head. I looked down at Eli, who was under the stairs on the couch watching TV, and asked him if he heard Gabriel, and he said, "Screw that, bro," and just started running out of the house, and I followed. But no joke, that was by far the most fear I've ever felt in my life. Whatever was talking to us, or I guess talking to Eli, sounded evil though. It was using Gabriel's voice. The school they went to was about an hour bus ride, so Gabriel didn't arrive home until 4:30, and of course we told him all about it, and he thought we were crazy. But I would see him run into the bathroom at night sometimes too. The most I ever had seen up until that point was a door closing on its own while we were playing Smash on the 3DS. And another time at night, I felt a blanket pulled or tugged off me, but this time was different. That voice hearing the desperation, yelling for us, still sends chill down my spine. My husband and I moved into our apartment about 2 years ago. Ever since, we've always had weird things and encounters happening. In our closet, we have a hatch to the attic. We are on the top floor, and it sits in the ceiling and can be locked with 2 latches, much like the ones you see in a public bathroom at the store that slide and turn to lock in place. Multiple times we've heard the latch move, and when we go to check, they are unlocked. A few times the hatch itself has been moved and not fully closed. We have heard what sounds like footsteps and people walking above us, but there's not a way for anyone to get into our attic or the roof. We've had items moved, pictures fall off the wall, lights flicker even after changing light bulbs. Blinds by our patio doors randomly start swinging and things get knocked off tables or counters. My husband recently had surgery and can't move his arms very much to put shirts on. One day, he felt small childlike hands help him pull his shirt over his head and pull it down. We have 2 dogs and 2 cats who really don't get along, but one day the cat got into the kitchen and sat next to the dog. All 3 were staring in the kitchen. We've done saging and cleansing, and that does make things stop for a few days, but it always starts up again. I really do believe there is something in the apartment that wants to make itself known, but any time we try and record anything, everything stops. I'm hoping something will happen soon. Back in '84, when I was 14, I lived in Spokane with my mum and her significant other. It was an older, smaller house. The upstairs was a converted attic that had been split into 2 rooms. One room was on the top of the stairs. I set that section up as my living room. Then a door and an identically sized room that was my bedroom. The ceiling was low and slanted down on the sides, so there was only a strip about 3 inches wide along the center where you could stand. Our dog was a rescue, and I blamed previous owners for his absolute fear of the stairs that led to my room. He would cower and whimper at the foot of the stairs, and when I tried to show him my room, I thought he was afraid of the stairs, so I carried him up to show him my room. He starts whining and yelping. He was all the way down on his belly and released his bowels and ran downstairs and out of the house. I didn't think too much of it, and never felt any bad feeling up there. After about a week of living there, I would wake up most nights around 3 a.m. and would hear very faint classical music. I thought it was neighbours or my mum or something along those lines, and didn't worry about it. Then one night I slept with the door between my rooms open. When I woke up at around 3 a.m, I could hear the music, but I noticed a glow coming from my living room. My stereo was on. I stood in the doorway and could see it was turned to the local AM classical music station. The volume was way down. I slept with the light on and the door closed that night. The next morning my stereo was turned up to the classic FM station that I listened to. Nearly every night, I would wake up and hear this stereo playing classical music. Because I never felt dread or fear, I decided it was a friendly ghost and I started to tune the radio to FM version of the station. They broadcast the same thing on AM and FM, but FM sounded way better, with the volume low, but not as low as the ghost would have it. It was my way of trying to be nice to it. We moved out a few months after we moved in. At the time, my mum said it was because they raised the rent, but she told me a few years later that she was tired of the ghost in her room. She said that it would open the curtains and doors while she was sleeping. I'm a skeptic, and I try really hard to believe that I was just sleepwalking. Our attic is above the attached garage, instead of the main part of the house. It has a pull-down ladder thing. We've never gone up there. Earlier today, I was in the garage taking pictures of some pool stuff the previous owners left to show the guy at the pool store so he could tell us what we were supposed to use it for. The attic door was closed then. We left the house, ran errands and came back after 4 hours. We opened the garage and the attic door was pulled down. Like far down, not just semi-open. I was like, whoa, but thought maybe it just fell open or something. I closed it and pulled the string to reopen it, and it took a lot of force. Plus, if you don't open it far enough past a certain point, it springs back up closed. So it would have to have been pulled hard enough and far enough to stay open like that. I went up the ladder with my iPhone flashlight like a horror movie, but there's nothing up there at all. My parents suggested maybe a person broke in, but it was broad daylight. My car was in the driveway, and it's a cul-de-sac, so that was pretty unlikely. I just have no idea how it could have physically opened and stayed open like that without being pulled down hard enough. This story happened when I was growing up in Bulgaria as a teenager. It was one of those days during summer break where I'd occasionally visit my grandparents to let off some steam after another school year. One of my cousins was quite insistent to explore an old abandoned house right next to ours, which he believed to be haunted. As we entered the front yard, I had an uneasy feeling stir over me that we were being watched, but my younger cousin thought I was joking and just brushed it off. Once we were out the house's yard, I saw the cellar door of the house move slightly inwards, but there wasn't any wind causing it to do that. On the next day, him and I went to a smaller area right next to that same old house to play with a soccer ball. As time passed, I felt something again while passing the ball to my cousin, and it caused me to turn my attention to the attic window of the house, where I saw a shadowy figure grinning at me. I neither flinched nor screamed nor moved, just stood there for what felt like a full minute. I shook myself out of it, and I just happened to turn to my cousin to ask if he saw it as well, but he didn't believe me. The creepy grin had something in its face that remained in my mind, and I remember the encounter to this day, many years later. Could it have been my imagination? Or do you think there was really a phantom in the attic? I had always been a skeptic when it came to the paranormal, but that all changed the night I encountered a spirit in the attic of my childhood home. It was a hot summer night, and I couldn't sleep due to the oppressive heat. As I tossed and turned in my bed, I suddenly heard a faint knock coming from the ceiling above me. Thinking it was just the old pipes in the house making the noise, I tried to ignore it to go back to sleep. But the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. Eventually I couldn't take it any longer and decided to investigate. I slowly made my way to the attic, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a ghostly figure hovering in the corner of the room. I was frozen with fear, unable to speak or move, when suddenly it disappeared before my eyes, leaving me alone in the darkness. That night was the night I learnt that the paranormal was real, and that there are forces beyond our understanding at work in the world. The spirit in the attic will stay with me forever, as a reminder that there is much in the universe we do not understand. I have worked in a fair share of creepy places, but this one takes the top spot. The best way to describe it is an 1800s mansion. The place is huge and very creepy, the sort of place where you wouldn't want to be alone in. We were doing some renovations in the building, as it was going to be made into a place for the public to be taken around and on tours and such. Well, one thing we had to do was block off a doorway that went into an attic space that was very unsafe. Inside the attic space was a huge circular glass window that you could see the main parking area. All the while, we felt like we were being watched, and occasionally there would be banging coming from the attic. We assumed it came from another part of the building, as there wasn't anything in there that could fall over, and we were only blocking up the way in. So, we completed the job, loaded the tools into the truck, and as we were leaving I looked up into the building, and there, I see a woman dressed in all white waving at us. The three of us waved back, before realizing she was standing dead in the center of the circular window in the attic that we had just closed off. We freaked out, and when we looked up again, she was gone. When I was growing up in the UK, we lived in a normal terraced house. This comes on later in the story. We had a 2-bedroom house, and I hated my bedroom. I always felt uneasy and scared, especially scared of a built-in wardrobe. The door would always open, even when I made sure it was closed. This wardrobe had my mum's things in it, plus I would hear footsteps on the landing and up the stairs, and it was a very distinctive noise. It wasn't a normal creaking, and my mum would say, "Don't worry, it's just the next door neighbours. The floorboards are all connected." Me, being young and dumb, believed that. It never got any worse than that for years, just footsteps moving around the door, and the constant fear couldn't shake it. Then my sister was born, and we needed a 3rd bedroom. So my parents turned the attic into a bedroom, which became mine. But while they were renovating it, the stairs going up to the attic needed to be built, and it was on the other side of the creepy wardrobe, and the partition wall was left open and covered with a plastic sheet, and I was playing in the hallway with my 2 friends next to it. And I then got a sudden fear descend worse than ever, and at that very moment, the plastic sheet shot out like a figure had run into it. We all ran screaming, and my mum came to me, checked, and I said what happened. I'll never forget how her face dropped, and she went white and just said, "Don't worry, the workmen must be putting in the new window for your bedroom. It must make a draft." Fast forward to the attic becoming my bedroom. I was even more terrified than the old room. The noises of footsteps coming up the stairs, the constant fear. I thought I saw a figure a few times from the corner of my eyes, but never head on, and I could never sleep. It got so bad that I had to sleep on the floor in my sister's room for 2 years. Now the kicker. My mum is very spiritual, and what was in the wardrobe? A Ouija board. She had horrible experiences with one and said she couldn't get rid of it. I'm a believer. More creepy goings-on have happened to me through the years, and that was the worst and most consistent. We lived in the house from when I was 4 to 12, and once we moved, nothing creepy happened in the house again. I still feel that weird feeling in places, but never more than that. When I was 16, I questioned my mum on all of it, and she too said she heard and saw things, more than me, but didn't want my sister or I to be scared. She still wouldn't say what the board said or did, but it was when she was younger that it happened. I wonder if any of you know what's happening and what my mum is hesitant to talk about. When I was staying with family in an old renovated stone cottage that was hundreds of years old and built on the vast grounds of a monastery that was destroyed during the dissolution by Henry VIII, the cottage was nestled on the edge of these grounds with a few more modern holiday homes, at the foot of a great hill where an old ruined castle stands guard overlooking the landscape. It was a beautiful scenic place with walking trails right on the doorstep. This house had been in the family for 80 years, and we stayed there so that we could help with the renovation during the visit. It is their second house and is normally an Airbnb, so this was our first and last stay at this cottage. The spookiness began on the first night. I shared a room with my brother, as there were a lot of us staying there, and he went to bed early. I went to bed around midnight, trying to fall asleep, as I heard heavy boot-like footsteps up in the attic. The boot steps would walk above my head to the far end of the house, stop for 10 minutes, then walk back above my head to the other end. This pattern would repeat for hours. This was a very distinct pattern, far, far too heavy to be any animal walking around. The pacing was deliberate, the pause between each step long enough to suggest slow, wide strides. This occurred every night we were there, and my brother heard it too. I did try and record the sound, but it didn't come out very well, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and it would still be there, walking back and forth. After 2 nights of this, I casually asked Grandad if the house had a loft, or attic. It did. It was an inaccessible hatch over the stairs that would require a long ladder to reach, and his first response to the casual question was, "Why? Did you hear something?" I said yes and explained what we heard, and he got a bit defensive, saying it was just animals and rats up there. No small rodent could make the noises we heard, I'm sure. On the final night, the footsteps crunched on the stones on the front of the cottage at 11 p.m. This was a bit odd, so I checked out the windows with a limited view and saw no one and no torchlight either. The footsteps faded away in the distance. This could be explained as someone on the walking trail late at night who just took a wrong turn and ended up outside our cottage in the dark without a flashlight, but I'm not so convinced. What do you guys think? Over this summer, my house had recently gained a quite active spirit. We don't know where it came from, but I think it lived in the attic, and since I was cleaning the attic this summer, I must have disturbed it, and now it became more active. I don't think it's evil, but it had the ability to speak. I, for one, have heard it say okay when I was home alone, and asked it to stop slamming doors. Now, onto the case at hand. My sister and stepmom were away this summer, so they didn't experience the attic spirit's arrival. But when I had friends over, they would hear it walking around the stairs upstairs or slamming doors or have lights turn on or off. Once my sister and stepmom had got home, people instantly got to telling me about what was going on, and she laughed in their face, and for the past months telling me I was making it up and I was going insane. This continued until Wednesday recently, when it finally decided to show itself on her. On Wednesday, my sister had cheerleading and was late to be leaving and was in a rush. My sister is very abusive towards me, so I'm there sitting in my room as she's screaming at me to get her stuff ready because she doesn't want to be late. I told her to do it herself, and she responds by start walking to my room, but before she could get to it, the sound of footsteps running up the stairs and her bedroom door being slammed in her face. She was shook and began asking me how I'd done that, and now she finally believes that there is a spirit in the attic. This happened when I was in middle school. I'm 23 now, but remember it like it was yesterday. It freaked me out so badly, the memory is burnt permanently into my mind. My house was a 2-level duplex. Mine and my siblings' bedrooms and a bathroom and the laundry room were downstairs. The kitchen, a bathroom, and more bedrooms were upstairs. The master bedroom was upstairs, and it had a walk-in closet. The closet was longer than it was wide. There were railings and shelves on either side with a small desk at the back wall and a small attic door in the middle of the ceiling. The door didn't have a handle. It was one of those you'd have to push up to move aside. This walk-in closet was where we kept the desktop computer. Well, naturally, me being 12 and it being 2006, I wanted to be on the computer all the time. I would just go online, talk to friends, play games, go on Facebook, 12-year-old stuff. Though whenever I was in the closet, I had weird feelings. I was definitely most wary of the attic door, but found it easy to brush off because my desire to browse the web was too great. I got home from school one afternoon, and I arrived alone because me and my siblings are different age groups, so we went to different schools. I assumed my older brothers would be home by then and would be playing games in their rooms. So I quickly threw my stuff into my room and went straight upstairs to the computer. I think I had been home for at least an hour. I was on Tumblr, minding my own business, when suddenly I felt watched. It was an uncomfortable feeling. I felt a presence behind me. It felt heavy. I turned around thinking my brother was trying to scare me, but no one was there, although I did see a shadow outside the closet door, as if something had slipped out just as I turned around. At this point I still thought one of my brothers were home, and that they were downstairs, and that I wasn't in fact all alone, which already freaked me out for a start. The upstairs gave me paranormal nervous feelings, and I was never comfortable alone upstairs. But I digress. I still thought it was my brother trying to scare me, so I went back to whatever I was doing online. Not long after, something else happened. I heard someone say my name in my left ear. It was so clear. The sound of a rush of energy through my entire body. It happened so fast. Immediately I knew it was not the voice of someone I knew. Definitely not of one of my brothers. It was almost feminine. So calm and demanding of all my attention. It was almost non-threatening. That didn't stop me from scaring the absolute crap out of me. I whipped my head around to see who or what it was, but again there was no one standing behind me. What I saw instead was the pitch darkness of the inside of the attic, and the little attic door slammed shut at that very moment. We live in a very old house. Not sure when it was built, but it was way before any of my family members could remember. Our attic is the scariest place in the house. No one goes up there unless it's unload holiday decorations. The attic door is on the ceiling of our second floor, so right above me and my brother's room. It's a bit weird that I'm the only one who hears the sounds. By sounds I mean scurrying, tapping, scratching, and creaking and the like. I hear them at night, and only at night. And when I asked my mum if she's ever heard anything up there, she said she'd never heard anything. We originally thought that it was a family of squirrels or something up there, but when we checked, there was no signs of any animals anywhere. It was silent, and the floor of the attic looked devoid of scratches or signs of animals living there. The scariest story from the attic was from last year. There was a really bad storm outside, and it's pretty late too. Around midnight. My whole family was asleep when suddenly we heard this really loud thump. Not like a bump, but a thump. Almost like something had hit the roof of our house really hard. This woke everyone up, and we started to freak out a little bit. It was really dark, so we didn't want to investigate very far. But in the morning we went to check on the attic and the roof. No dents, no cracks, nothing up on the roof. The same applied for the attic too. Nothing had fallen over or spilled or anything. The noises had become less frequent ever since, but I can still hear a faint creaking up there every once in a while. And I'm never going up there again. This started off a year ago at 4 a.m. when I heard what sounded like someone knocking on my bedroom window. There are no trees near my house or anything else that could possibly be hitting my window. Not only that, but it definitely has the unique sounds of human knuckles tapping on glass. I was terrified and didn't go to open the blinds on my window because I imagined that if I did, I would see a horrifying face staring at me. So I went to sleep and tried to ignore it. It carried on for another half an hour, on and off tapping. It happened every night at the exact same time for weeks after that. But then it seemed to stop, until a month later when I once again, between 2 and 4 a.m., heard the same distinct tapping on my window. I immediately remembered it from before, but this time I grabbed my knife and opened the blinds. I couldn't see anything, which was weird, but I was relieved there was no one staring at me. Ever since then, it happened once every few weeks, or sometimes a few times per week. Always when my blinds are closed, until about 3 weeks ago when I was texting my friend with my back to the window with the open blind, and I heard it again. Louder because of the open blind. I was terrified to turn around, and I immediately called my friend, who I'd already told about it before, and explained what was happening. He laughed and said I should turn around. I did, and once again there was nothing there, so I said goodbye to my friend and went to sleep. Now it would have been fine if it had just stayed with the knocking and nothing else, but ever since that night 3 weeks ago I've not heard a single knock at my window. Instead I now hear footsteps in the attic, above my room, directly above where my window is. This obviously freaked me out a bunch, because my first thought was that either whoever it was had been knocking at my window has found a way into my house via the attic, or there's an actual person living in my house. I played it off as just sounds that a house makes, and turned it into a joke on my Instagram of Attic Man. But I noticed a few days ago that gradually over the past 3 weeks, since I first heard the footsteps, they've been getting closer and closer to the hatch that leads to my attic, which very unfortunately just happens to be directly above my door. Ever since then, whenever I have to leave my room at night for any reason, I always nervously look up at the hatch first to make sure it is still closed. But tonight is different. About half-hour ago I needed to go out of my room to the bathroom, which happens to be right next to my room. But as soon as I opened my door, I felt a very strong feeling of fear that someone was staring at me from somewhere. I forced myself to go to the bathroom to brush my teeth anyway. But whilst I was in the bathroom, I started hearing the footsteps again, right next to the hatch in the attic. I ran back to my room and closed the door and got into bed. Then just recently I heard this light thud outside my door, just as if someone had dropped down from the attic and into the hallway. I was terrified and messaged my friends, but just like my family, they're all asleep as it's 3:40 in the morning. I turned out all the lights in my room except for one, hoping that if there was something out there it wouldn't notice me. For about 5 minutes after that I could hear footsteps and the floorboards creaking along the hall, and then go down the stairs, and then come back up. After that they stopped, and instead I can now hear scratching and tapping sounds in all of my walls. Also, for about a minute I actually heard a weird sound of what sounds like monks chanting, which kept getting louder until it was loud enough that I was sure I wasn't imagining it.